OSG, change the game. Come together, bringing leaders, we don't play. Make a difference, being different, switching lanes. OSG, change the game.
This week I was talking on my morning show about being actively heuristic, meaning that we only kind of think about the things that sort of surround us, and that it really impressed upon me to understand that all the doctors in OSG that's in this little bubble, it doesn't exist anywhere else. It's an anomaly. It's a phenomenon. All of the continuous doctors that are popping out of OSG, it doesn't happen anywhere else, because in the entire world, only 2% of people that actually go to get their doctorate. So to see this happen at this level, at this pace, in this community is really telling me that we are onto something incredibly special. And I am just honored that you chose me to ride shotgun on this ride with your brother, because this is something that I know that they will not forget about. They will write about this for hundreds and hundreds of years. You guys are incredible people. Shout out to my OSG family.
I think what you're doing is something special. And when we talk about hip hop, we can't talk hip hop without my brother, the legendary Uncle Lay's right here, MOP's finest right there, Brownsville's finest right there. So I definitely want you to take a moment to tell us what's going on.
Yeah, straight up legend, for sure. I'll keep it brief, but really with healthy hip hop, and that's why I was so excited how it came on. Like, y'all started with hip hop. We know that hip hop is the language that our children speak. And so healthy hip hop is taking that same urban beat and then just putting a positive message over it about education, health, and wellness, but still keeping it culturally competent. So it sounds like what they're hearing in the streets. And a quick version of my story, I was that kid just moved by the culture, came out of high school and decided instead of going to college, I was going to be a rapper in the streets of Kansas City at all places. So my family's actually from New York, originally from Brooklyn, and went to upstate to Rochester. But so anyway, was on that journey of being a hip hop artist in the streets of KC, and had my wake up call when I noticed my son, he was about 4 years old. He was repeating my music word for word. And so that music promoted drugs, violence, misogyny. And that was my light bulb moment to create something, positive, but again, still culturally relevant. So Healthy Hip Hop was born. We've been on this mission ever since, and we pivoted to a tech company. So we have an online platform and a mobile application. And I ended up with this. Really, we want to take hip hop back to its roots. When it was born in New York, it was born in a time of, it was challenges in the community with drugs and poverty, but hip hop was like bringing people together, and it was dancing. It was the core of it. Even the original messaging was about uplifting the community. And I know it kind of took a turn. So we want to take it back to its roots, but in a way that really resonates with today's kids. So I'm excited to be here.
If you look over the DOE in New York, they talk about a 1-to-5 ratio of students that are suffering from mental health issues, right? Mm. And so when we talk about, that's about 20%. And when we're talking about that in New York City, that's with 1 million plus kids, we're talking about well over 200,000. Now, if you ask me, Lays, I think the number is even higher than that. And one of the things that we got to keep in mind is the experts that were in place at one time or another to address these issues. To be able to address the issue of mental health issues for over 200, almost 300,000 students, and not to mention their families, not to mention staff, as well as even some of our school leaders, it's almost an impossible task, almost impossible, right? And so there's been
it's a mental health pandemic. It's a pandemic. That's what it is.
So what's so funny, you mentioned that, Lays, because, something I was watching not long ago and talk about the pandemic within the pandemic, right? So we talk about COVID, but within the COVID, we've also got a lot of other things too. We got orphans, we got people children who no longer have families. We got people who don't no longer have food. There's pandemics within this pandemic. And so being able to address that is almost impossible. And so I think what the pandemic has showed us is there's a way to do things virtually. There's a way to communicate and to help support people virtually, remotely, by use of technology.
Here at Shmoop, when we thought about innovation back in 2018, we started thinking about how we were going to approach the biggest challenges that teachers were telling us that they needed, which were approaching mental health in a way that would allow us to be encouraging to kids, that we wouldn't cross any lines with, that would engage students in a way, but also be vetted for race and sexual orientation and all kinds of other challenges and things that you can and can't do, out of the school system, right? So the concepts of what we were doing really started to come down to how we really approached students' progress. And so what we did was we set out to go create Heartbeat. We created our earliest patents on the product. And what we do with Heartbeat is I'll just verbally communicate what our product does. But what we're doing with the product is we're allowing students to answer questions. And we're allowing the students to provide us guidance onto who they are and who really makes them them. But we're also taking some of that data and we're highlighting it for teachers and counselors at scale. And so we call this platform the Shmoop Heartbeat. But the Learner Variability Project is made up of 4 different categories. And it's made up of how these different social emotional factors tie to academics. So it's one thing for you to understand a student's challenges around mental health, but why does that really matter? What is that? What's the purpose of why that matters? And so we're measuring 4 different characteristics. One is the academics for the student. 2 is their cognition. 3rd is their social emotional behavioral they're learning. And 4th is their background. So we're looking at these 4 different areas for each student. So we realize that all of these different challenges for students that make up who they are and what their background is actually impacting their academics. And what the Shmoop Heartbeat is doing is it's explaining why those things impact academics. It's connecting the dots for educators.
What was very interesting and telling and even scary, I'll use that word, is one of the questions I asked the principals is, what systems do you have in place to identify trauma impacted students? And their responses were, we don't have a system, we have a social worker. That's not a system. That's problematic. If we don't understand how kids are walking into the building or why kids are walking into the building the way in which we are, we can't provide services for them. And also, if we don't understand the different type of issues that that children are dealing with, right? If we don't understand the different type of issues that children are dealing with, we don't know how to treat them. But where the data comes out is, can a kid read? Can a kid write? We haven't looked at, did a kid eat? We haven't looked at, did a kid bathe? We haven't looked at, is a kid in a bed at night? We haven't looked at, is a kid raising a child? We haven't looked at all of these other issues, but where the negative behaviors always manifest and present themselves is in school. So I think that what you're doing in helping principals identify the issues that children are dealing with is extremely important. And, I just pray that the tool is something that is can be easily used, is child friendly and not scary and overburdened, because the last thing we want to do is throw another thing, on a principal's plate or on a teacher's plate, or on a guidance counselor's plate, in the hopes of servicing children, and we're not really doing the service the right way. So it sounds like that you really are onto something, because we do need help in finding ways to identify what's bothering our children.